Happy Halloween month, everybody, and Tony here with my review of Beethoven's Fidelio, which I saw at the Deutsche Oper Berlin. The conductor was Stefan Zilias, the production was done by David Hermann, the sets and costumes were done by Johannes Schütz, the assistant director was Constanze Weidknecht, the lights were handled by Ulrich Niepel, the chorus master was Jeremy Bynes, and the dramaturg was Caroline Müller-Dohle. I want to dedicate my review of Beethoven's Fidelio at the Deutsche Oper Berlin to my mother, who will be celebrating her birthday tomorrow by the end of this video, and especially by the time I edit this video. So Mom, if you're watching this video review, I wish you the happiest and the most blessed birthday. Thank you so much for being my mother. Thank you so much for raising me to be the best person I can be. And also thank you so much for helping me to be as open-minded and very engaged with my passions as much as I can. I bless you from the bottom of my heart. I wish you nothing more than abundant blessings and a whole lot of beauty and strength. And here's also hoping that your birthday celebration will be a brilliant one. So Mom, sit back, relax, and enjoy my review of Beethoven's Fidelio at the Deutsche Oper Berlin. So I came into this production with an open mind because this was going to be the first time I was going to see Jane Archibald tackle the role of Fidelio. Now, I mainly know Miss Archibald in a lot of lyric colorature soprano roles, especially roles that call for flexible singing as well as loads of high notes, such as the Queen of the Night, Constanze, Olympia, Zdenka, and Zerbinetta. In general, I had a lot of mixed feelings with Miss Archibald tackling the Fidelio Leonora, but that's just the short answer. If you want to find out the long answer, please tune in much later to this review because I'll talk about the production first. What I noticed about this production of Beethoven's Fidelio is that Mr. David Hermann set the action to our current times instead of 18th century Spain. The first half of the opera is mainly set in an enclosed prison with all the prisoners in masks and just basically sitting around in a semicircle. And there's even a corpse on stage while Jacquino and Marcellina are having their little arguments. After Leonora sings her grand aria Abscheuliche, she hands each of the prisoners a key, and each of the prisoners take off their masks to experience the open, fresh air. Even one of the prisoners breaks down the concrete walls so that all of them can experience the outside. Rocco in this production is portrayed to be a lot meaner than the usually doting father to Marcellina, and a little bit more generous to Jacquino. But here he just comes off as a total bully to Jacquino in the very first act. And in the second half of the opera, he's even willing to kill a stray prisoner by shooting him down with a handgun. However, the Rocco in this production manages to make a total 180, especially when he starts to see that Leonora and Florestan do care for each other and ends up realizing that the one he took in as Fidelio is Leonora, who has come to save her husband from oppression and is in total support of them, thus leading him to also arrest Don Pizarro, put him in a grave that was intended for another prisoner, especially for Florestan, and ends up killing him with the back of the gun. And what's even more notable about the Don Pizarro in this production is that he gets to witness Florestan's and Leonora's reunion, O Namen Namenlose Freude. and he ends up covering his ears and trying to cover his head with his jacket before being exposed and eventually killed by Rocco. Speaking of the second half of the opera, it takes place in an earthy prison cell, with the surroundings being a sort of combination of a graveyard and a huge prison cell, especially for Florestan. And the ending of the opera has a huge crowd just protesting as loudly as possible, but still singing their lines, and with Florestan and Leonora back together again. The costumes are also modernized, as instead of seeing Marcellina with a frock and an apron, she is in a blue sweatshirt and black jogging pants and sneakers, while Leonora, dressed up as Fidelio, doesn't look convincing, as if though that she entered the prison cell dressed as a young boy. She still looks feminine, especially with that red jacket and those black pants. But other than that, even though I did kind of enjoy the foreboding nature of this production, I'm still not so crazy about it, and I'm still not so crazy about the costumes. Some of the divergences from the original libretto were kind of fun if you are hankering for something that's out of the box. But for those people who want a more traditional production, you might as well just turn elsewhere and catch a more traditional production of Beethoven's Fidelio. So I still have mixed feelings about David Herman's production of Beethoven's Fidelio, but even with its problems here and there, it can be enjoyable to watch if you're hankering for dark productions. But for me, I'd rather stick with a more traditional production. Now we get to the singers, starting off with Jane Archibald as Leonora. As I stated before, Jane Archibald is a lyric coloratura soprano who's been specializing in a huge array of roles, calling for agility, a silvery tone, and loads of high notes. From the Queen of the Night, to Zerbinetta, to Zdenka, and even to some of her latest endeavors with Matilde from Guillaume Tell, and Semiramide from Rossini's Semiramide. When I realized that she was taking on the Fidelio Leonora, I was completely shocked to my foundation, because there is no way a natural lyric coloratura soprano like Jane Archibald should ever dare touch the Fidelio Leonora. And now that she has an upcoming Empress from Richard Strauss's Die Frau ohne Schatten on the way, I still had my doubts. Heck, she even sang Richard Strauss's Salome, and that also made me just as befuddled. I should know, because I saw and heard Jane Archibald 10 years ago singing Zerbinetta from Richard Strauss's Ariadne auf Naxos at the Royal Opera House in London, and I thought she did a wonderful job, all thanks to her lovely, silvery, and absolutely gorgeous lyric coloratura soprano voice that could climb the highest notes well as have that nice silvery quality that made her pleasing to the ear, as well as just absolutely lovely to listen to. Here, as the Fidelio Leonora, I thought she was pushing her natural lyric coloratura soprano voice to places where it should never ever be pushed. Sometimes when she had to sing those big high notes, there were occasions where she felt like she had to push her voice to just let it ring. And there were times that her chest tones sounded hollow and unsupported. There were times that she pulled off some chest tones, but for the most part, they sounded hollow and they didn't sound rich enough. They also didn't sound totally supported, and there were also occasions where she ended up singing in collapsed head voice in the middle range as well as the lower parts of her voice, which is a huge shame because Jane Archibald's material is for a natural lyric coloratura soprano. This is a voice that is way more suitable to singing Corina from Il Viaggio a Rams, Matilde di Chabran, Amina from La Sonnambula, Elvira from I Puritani, Violetta from La Traviata, both Olympia and Antonia from Le Comte of Man, Constanze from Die Entführung aus dem Serail, Lucia Ashton from Lucia di Lammermoor, Linda from Linda di Chamonix, the Woodbird from Siegfried, one of the flower maidens from Parsifal, Massenet Manon, and this is someone who I would rather hear as Marguerite de Valois from Les Huguenots and Isabelle from Rebelle le Diable, not something as beefy and steely and strong as the Fidelio Leonora. I should know because I've always preferred singers in these particular categories. The first category is the natural dramatic soprano. First subcategory are the dramatic sopranos that also started out as mezzos, but also managed to do spinto soprano roles as well. And those included Rose Bampton and Walburga Wegner, who both started out as both contraltos or mezzos, but eventually found their ways in the more spinto and dramatic soprano roles. Subcategory 2 are the natural dramatic sopranos who sang Brunhilde, Isolde, and all of these roles that require a full, rich, and absolutely voluminous voice coupled with some piercing high notes in the forms of Frida Laida, Kirsten Flagstad, Rose Pauli, Birgit Nilsson, Gertrud Grob-Prandl, Gwyneth Jones, and Hildegard Behrens. The second category would be the Falcon singers, and I'm talking about Emmy Kruger, Martha Mödel, Christa Ludwig, Shirley Verrett, Gail Gilmore, and Waltraud Maya, although in terms of Gilmore and Maya, they may not be everybody's favorite choice for Fidelio Leonora, but in terms of Martha Mödel, Christa Ludwig, and Shirley Verrett, yeah, they would be the perfect candidates for the Fidelio Leonora because of their superb use of chest tones coupled with some blazing high notes. And then we get to category 3, the dramatic sopranos who could also sing mezzo-soprano roles extremely well. And those include, but are not limited to, Martha Fuchs, Gertrud Rünger, Annika Netzny, Helena Braun, Erna Schlüter, Margaret Harshaw, Astrid Varnay, Ludmila Vorakova, Ingrid Steger, Sigrid Kehl, Nadezhda Kniplova, and Janice Martin. And then we lead to another category, the honorable category. How about singers who started out as dramatic sopranos but ended up singing mezzo-sopranos? Yes, we also got Martha Mödel, but I'd also like to focus on Regina Resnick and Helga Dernesch, who were just as successful as mezzo-sopranos. Those are the type of singers that I would rather hear as the Fidelio Leonora, not someone like Jane Archibald, who has a naturally silvery lyric coloratura soprano voice, but is just so punished in singing a role like this. I would rather stick with Annika Netzny, Helena Braun, Erna Schlüter, Margaret Harshaw, Martha Mödel, Astrid Varnay, and Sigrid Kehl as my personal favorite Fidelio Leonoras, because they were able to combine their naturally dark and cavernous chest tones with some excitingly blazing top notes. And before I forget, I would never ever forget about Helena Wildbrunn and Anna Bar Mildenburg, who were just as fantastic singing both mezzo-soprano and dramatic soprano roles. They were just as brilliant as the Fidelio Leonora. The few glimmers of hope I have about Jane Archibald's portrayal of the Fidelio Leonora is that at least she was able to handle some of the florid passages well, but it's still not enough to convince me that she could tackle Leonora's music. My only advice to Jane Archibald is just take a few steps back, stop trying to do all of these bigger, more dramatic roles, and focus on your real forte, silvery singing that could do much better for her voice, and even just bulk up on more bel canto and French music. That would have been better for Miss Archibald to have done instead of her more recent endeavors as the Fidelio Leonora, Salome, and the upcoming Empress, although I might be willing to give it a little bit of a fair shake because she does have some coloratura passages on there, but I'm just hoping that Jane Archibald will just be a lot more conscientious with her recent undertaking of these roles, because this is a naturally silvery voice that I do not want to hear punished. And with the insufficient vocal resources that she had, i.e. collapsed head voice, not great use of chest tones, and sometimes her high notes feeling as if those that she was constantly pushing it. There were just times I felt like her voice was unfit, totally unfit to sing the Fidelio Leonora. So my only advice for Jane Archibald is just to stay away from the more dramatic roles and stick to roles that call for florid singing, call for a lot more agility. Heck, she could have just done herself a favor and sung the likes of Amalia from I Mazzadieri, Antonia from Le Comte of Man, Armida by Rossini, Marguerite de Valois from Les Huguenots, Isabelle from Robert le Diable, Massenet's Esclarmonde, Sita from Massenet's Le Roi de Lahore, Magda di Civri from Puccini's La Rondine, and lest I forget about the Donizetti queens, Anna Bolena, Maria Stuarda, and Elisabetta from Roberto de Vereux. Those are roles that are more suitable for Jane Archibald rather than the Fidelio Leonora. So I still have to give her some credit for being gutsy enough to undertake this role, but it's still not enough to convince me that she could do this role justice. At least with Lilith Daftian as Marcelline, she was in her A game tonight. She was absolutely lovely and absolutely gorgeous as Marcelline. She continued to take advantage of her silvery, sweet-sounding, and absolutely agile light lyric coloratura soprano voice that was just so lovely to listen to and absolutely pleasing to the ear. You could argue that she could use a lot more creaminess to the voice, i.e. the ones that I expect from the likes of Elisabeth Schwarzkopf, Eleanor Stieber during the 1940s, Olivera Miljakovic, Irmgard Siegfried, Elsie Morrison, and the young Sena Jurinats. However, Lilith Daftian's performance as Marcelline was still superb as ever, and I still salute her for delivering the vocal goods as this lovely young lady. I'm in two minds about Oreste Cosimo as Florestan. Although I did not catch him as Hoffmann, I did read his biography and realized that he specializes in a lot of the wonderful lyric tenor roles that call for sensitive singing, a whole lot of musicianship and artistry, and a whole lot of vocal beauty. Not just Hoffmann, who also does have some moments where he has to sing big, but also sensitive roles like Rodolfo from La Bohème and Alfredo from La Traviata, as well as the Duke from Rigoletto. These are roles that are naturally suited to his lyric tenor voice. And realizing that he was going to tackle a Heldentenor role like Florestan also put my hair on end, because this is a voice that should never ever be punished to sing these type of huge and demanding roles. So of course he has a lot of artistry in making the role of Florestan work for him. He brought in pathos and beauty and a lot of strong musicianship to make the role of Florestan work extremely well. And he did a commendable job making Florestan a long-suffering man and used his stage presence to his advantage to bring out a whole bunch of vocal beauty, especially helped by his rock-solid technique thanks to his sturdy, full lyric tenor voice. However, I expect a lot more meat in this particular role and beefiness as well, because who I have in my ears for true Heldentenors singing Florestan are the likes of Günther Treptow, Hans Beurer, Joachim Zottler, James King, and John Vickers. Those were real beefy Heldentenors with equally beefy voices and super strong voices that can be incisive and cut well throughout the orchestra. Yes, there are also some strong full lyric tenors who could sing Florestan, especially Colomon von Pataki and Anton der Mota. But if you ask me and my tastes, I've always preferred it when a Heldentenor, let alone a dark voice dramatic tenor, can be able to sing Florestan's music and keep up with the demands of said role. At least with Oreste Cosimo, what he has at his disposal is superb musicianship and heaps upon heaps of determination to make him shine as a singing actor. So I still have to give him some props for that. And I still have to give him some props for having such a sturdy technique to back him up. Thomas Ciluffo was brilliant and absolutely handsome as Iachino. His lyric tenor voice was strong, well-established, and had superb technique, all thanks to good chest tones, and he knew how to cover his voice well. He did not sound nasal. He did not sound woofy. There was nothing in his voice that screamed major flaw. In fact, Thomas Ciluffo's voice was absolutely flawless. There is a sense of vocal beauty and virility to be found in Thomas Ciluffo as Iachino. He was able to sing his music so well with a lot of beauty, lyricism, charm, and handsomeness. That is just how much Thomas Ciluffo won me over as a singing actor, especially with his portrayal of Iachino. And he's quite up there with some of my favorite Iachinos of all time, such as Rudolf Schock and Waldemar Kment, just to name a few. He was in his absolute A-game tonight, and I salute him for what he was able to accomplish as Iachino. John Irvin was an absolutely beautiful first prisoner, taking full advantage of his gorgeous full lyric tenor voice to make this role come alive, and do so with elan and handsomeness. Tobias Kira was always reliable as a singing actor, and Rocco is one of his signature roles that he managed to specialize in for many years in various opera houses. And the experience that he has as Rocco, regardless of any production, shows his vocal assets were still as formidable and strong as ever, and his round, rich, basso profondo voice managed to sell me extremely well, and I continue to salute Tobias Kira for what he was able to accomplish as Rocco. And he did an amazing job making this particular character come to life with virility and a whole lot of strength, both vocally and theatrically, to the point where he's totally up there with some of my favorite Roccos, including Gottlob Frick, Kurt Böhme, and Josef Greindl. He continues to win me over with his superb musicianship and his absolute virility as a basso profondo. Artur Garbas is a dashing Don Fernando. He was able to use that natural cavalier baritone voice to his advantage, but if you know me, I prefer a darker voiced basso cantante bordering on basso profondo to sing this role. Who I always have in my ears are the likes of Franz Krass, thanks to his noble basso cantante voice that can do bass baritone, but he always had the temperament of a basso cantante, and the more basso profondo voice of Martti Talvela, whose virility and strength won me over as this superb character part. I've always loved it when any basso cantante takes on Don Fernando, because this role does call for not only virility and strength, but also pure authority. So while I could give Artur Garbas credit where credit is due for his portrayal of Don Fernando, I'm still kind of missing that extra meatiness and that extra depth and extra darkness needed in any true basso cantante singing Don Fernando. But other than that, his tone was focused and steady, and his reedy tone managed to make him absolutely pleasing to listen to. Joel Allison was in excellent form as Don Pizarro. He was able to make him a menacing character. And sure, he had some campy moments where he was covering his ears and just being so annoyed with what's going on between Florestan and Leonora, especially when they end up being reunited at the climax of the opera. But he is still a commanding singing actor, all thanks to his handsome Helden baritone voice, which definitely has the potential to sing a lot more leading man roles like Telramund from Lohengrin, Hans Sachs, and even Fritz Kotner from Die Meistersinger von Nürnberg, Kurvenal from Tristan und Isolde, Klingsor from Parsifal, all three Wotans from Das Rheingold to Walküre and Siegfried by Richard Wagner, and even Alberich from the Ring Tetralogy. The possibilities for Mr. Allison are absolutely endless, and he had the absolutely strong stage presence to prove it. He also had sufficient depth and darkness to make Don Pizarro an absolutely villainous and serpentine character, and he just won me over. Granted, I do expect a lot more cavernousness and richness, and a lot more strength found in singers like Paul Schöffler and Hans Hotter, as well as my personal favorite Don Pizarro, Ferdinand Franz. But I could still salute Joel Allison for giving such a superb portrayal as this villain, and he definitely won me over tonight as Don Pizarro. The Second Prisoner, sung by Tadeusz Milewski, was absolutely wonderful. He used his virile bass baritone voice to make the best out of this character part and do so in a magnificent way. Overall, the singing was hit and miss, most notably from Jane Archibald as Leonora. I feel like she should never ever have taken this role, but I could still give her credit for trying to be as brave enough to tackle the Fidelio Leonora with everything that she's got. It's just a shame that her naturally silvery voice is not really adept to such a beefy, overpowering, and formidable role as Leonora. She definitely needs to take a few steps back and just really focus on roles that demand a lot of agility and using her silvery voice to her advantage and not trying to push it into roles that require all of this heft and all of this richness, roundness, and absolute might. As for Oreste Cosimo, while I could still commend him for his excellent musicianship, he also needs to take a few steps back and really focus on roles that are beneficial to his natural full lyric tenor voice instead of trying to challenge himself too much by taking on more beefy Heldentenor roles. He does have a great instrument, and he's got a lot of sensitivity found in his full lyric tenor voice. I just don't want to see him abuse his naturally lovely voice with roles as beefy and as overly overpowering as Florestan. He deserves to take a few steps back and focus on roles that call for sensitive singing. At least who we had as the stars tonight were Lilith Daftian as a superb Marcellina, Tobias Kera as an equally superb Rocco, Thomas Celufo being an absolutely great shining star as Giacchino, Joel Allison being wonderfully serpentine as Don Pizarro, Artur Garbas being quite noble as Don Fernando, even though I do prefer a basso cantante singing this role, and the superb duet sung by John Irvin and Tadeusz Milewski. These were the singers that managed to stand out well, and the only advice I could ever give to Jane Archibald and Oreste Cosimo is to take a few steps back and focus on roles that are actually good for their voices, as well as roles that can actually bring out the best in them and not overforce their voices into roles way too demanding for them. Otherwise, they'll end up suffering some really serious vocal crises. The conducting done by Stefan Cilias was bombastic and absolutely engaging and strong. It's just that there are times that the percussion and the brass tend to be overpowering and tend to be a little bit too much on some occasions. At least those segments are quite useful in the more charged up moments, but he could have used a lot more nuance and a lot more versatility in the tempi as well as the instrumentation. After all, I still love the likes of Herbert von Karajan in terms of his detail and Karl Böhm in terms of his precision that made their readings of Fidelio work so well. So I would suggest that Hercilias could take a few tips from those gentlemen. At least he was still able to be so involving in the music, and the chorus and orchestra of the Deutsche Oper Berlin were absolutely amazing, as they've always been. So overall, to say that I was extremely mixed with this production of Beethoven's Fidelio, from the production design itself all the way up to the singing, was quite an understatement. I was kind of drained from what I've heard tonight, because I felt like both Jane Archibald and Oreste Cosimo were relatively undervoiced, with Jane Archibald kind of being a lot more undervoiced because of how her natural lyric coloratura soprano voice should never, ever be singing roles like this. If I were in her position, I would have just stepped away from the Fidelio Leonore and leave someone else with a more reliable technique and a more reliable vocal size to take on the Fidelio Leonore, and not leave this role for anyone with a lighter voice. And when you have a Leonore and a Florestan that do not fulfill the requirements needed for those two roles, i.e. beefy voices, strong vocal presence, and a Helden quality to their voices, you know that it's not going to work. At least both Jane Archibald and Oreste Cosimo still managed to do relatively solidly in terms of how they were able to embody their roles, but their vocal resources do leave a lot to be desired, especially in the more charged up moments. At least there was more reliable singing found in Tobias Kera as Rocco, Artur Garbas as Don Fernando, Joel Allison as Don Pizarro, John Irvin and Tadeusz Milewski as the two prisoners, Thomas Ciluffo as Iachino, and Lilith Daftian as Marcelina. Those were the singers that managed to do their roles extremely well, and I really feel like they were the stars of tonight, who managed to do extremely superb jobs in the material that they were given. So I still have to give my salute to all of the singers. It's just that both Jane Archibald and Oreste Cosimo need to take a few steps back and really stick with roles that are actually good for their voices, and not ones that punish their voices to almost near obliteration. And for those of you who caught this production of Beethoven's Fidelio at the Deutsche Oper Berlin, what'd you think of it? Did you feel like Jane Archibald and Oreste Cosimo were undervoiced as Leonore and Florestan? Would you have loved another pair of singers to have taken on these roles? Did you also feel like there were singers who stole the thunders of Jane Archibald and Oreste Cosimo? And if so, which ones? Or did you feel like the singing was not really to your liking, and did you also feel that this production of Beethoven's Fidelio was also not to your liking? Please let me know in the comments below. Well, that's it for my review of Beethoven's Fidelio at the Deutsche Oper Berlin. And Mom, if you've made it to this end of the video, I hope you also enjoyed my review of this particular opera. Yes, there were a lot of points of contention that I had, but at least I still managed to find something good out of it. And I also hope that you also learned some things from my review. Furthermore, tune in tomorrow for my review of Rossini's Barbiere di Siviglia, also at the Deutsche Oper Berlin. And this also marks the second time that I'll be watching this production by Katharina Thalbach. So until then, good night everybody, and happy Halloween month.